Today I am delighted to be with Clover Stroud. I am here in the UK. Clover is in the United States at the moment in Washington. Delighted to see her there because we haven't seen each other in ages. She is a writer, author, journalist, all-round brilliant person. She writes memoir, she teaches people, she podcasts, she's a mother, she's a wife, not that she wants to be defined by that, I'm sure. And what she really does is she writes books that have absolutely taken off. So she's transitioned really from journalism into doing these wonderful memoirs. Her latest one is The Giant on the Skyline, which I have it here. I'm waving it at her. It's a beautiful book. I live relatively near where Clover's writing about. So I really feel it in my heart when I read it. It's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. And what I think Clover does is she expresses for many people their feelings. So she has a huge following of readers because I think her memoirs touch people in their hearts and souls. So Clover, over to you. Tell us about your book. Tell us about your life. You've left your beautiful home. You're in Washington, D.C. But the book is about, tell us about the book.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C. in our rented house, slightly regretting that I don't have the air conditioning on because it's absolutely boiling hot, which I know is not really what people in England want to hear about at the moment, where it's like November type of weather, but it's boiling hot here.
All right today, yeah.
But I've come from, so I moved here almost a year ago in August of last year, which seems quite extraordinary actually. And I'm 49 now. I was 47 when I knew that we were going to move because, but I didn't expect at all at this moment in my life to leave the place that I loved. And in fact, the reason that I wrote this book, so I've written 4 memoirs, and I'm embarking on my 5th at the moment, which is quite an odd feeling. It's not that my life has been so full of calamity and tragedy and trauma, although there has been quite a high level of tragedy and trauma. But my first book, The Wild Other, is a kind of classic memoir. And since then I've written about the emotions of life, like motherhood and grief. And then this newest one, The Giant on the Skyline, is about home. And that was because I had homesickness and longing for home, and needing home is one of like my earliest emotions that I can remember, really. And that kind of desire to be at home, and being at home for me meant being near my mum, really. And I can remember that as a really, really young child, that feeling of needing to be close to her. And then that was really, really ramped up when I was 16 because she had a really terrible, horrific accident which left her brain damaged. And she was in this state for 22 years. And that is kind of being unable to walk or talk or communicate, but being alive. And I think that all my writing is essentially like trying to express this kind of yearning and longing and melancholy and questioning and seeking that and a desire for beauty and life that what happened to her left me with. And I think that we're all, as human beings, yearning for something. We're all looking for the answer. We don't know what the question is. We definitely don't know what the answer is, but we're all looking for something. And nobody knows what the answer is. You know, I've been really looking at the work of lots of kind of, people, guru type of people that, especially in the age of the internet, that, they are the ones that know. Nobody knows the answer. Probably you, and deep inside, your answer, but nobody else can give you the answer. But home, so therefore, in a very long way, I'm saying that home and what home is has always been really important to me. And then about, a little while ago, my husband said, let's move to America, where he was working. And so the book is really about a big exploration of trying to understand what home was. And I lived in a beautiful part of South Oxfordshire near some really incredible landscape, which is full of sort of ancient signs of human life, like Uffington White Horse, the chalk horse, or the standing stones at Avebury. It is called a ritualized landscape. I love that word, a ritualized landscape created by human beings thousands of years ago. So first I thought, well, is it this landscape that I'm sad about leaving? Or is it the home that we've created, which was full of, blankets bought in charity shops and photographs, and the kids' room's a complete mess, but the mess that they wanted? Or was it the people in the community that I lived in? Or was it my memory of my mum and my sister who were dead, who I associated very, very closely with the landscape of which I was living? So the book is really looking at all those different elements of home, and not what an interior is, but that feeling of, a lot of people talk about that Welsh word hiraeth, meaning like bound to a place and a kind of longing for we don't have a sort of, it's not nostalgia and it's not sentimentality, but it's something along those lines. And so the book is kind of like it's complicated, I think, the exploration of those different, memory and time and place and geography and human beings. So that's what it's about. And then it ends with us moving here to DC, where I am now. And as a memoirist, I'm always writing in real time. I write about the stuff that's really going on right now with me. So it gives my writing a kind of immediacy, I think. And people, the more I've found, the more honest and open and personal I am in my writing, the more other people see their own selves and their own lives there. And that's why I write, to create those relationships, to create those connections, to create that feeling of not being alone, but being part of humanity, really.
I think that really comes across in a book. I just want to rewind a bit. I do like this thing. I think we are all looking for an answer. I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think, because this is about my book's about extraordinary relationships and how to have them. Obviously, a big part of that is with the self. And I do think people are searching for an answer. And what you're saying is, well, there isn't really an answer and there isn't really a question. So actually, what else is there then? When you're writing, where is it coming from? Because you have when I read your books, they're so heartfelt. It's literally like you're sitting next to me reading them to me. I can feel them. So how, do you feel them when you write them? I mean, because of course they're personal, they're memoirs. But some people go, well, my mother or my sister, or my home, and they wouldn't be able to write a book about it. So what happens for you that you can access writing?
I've always felt, like lots and lots of us, I've always felt stuff very, very strongly since I was really, really young. And I've felt a kind of sadness since I was really young. The melancholy. I love the word melancholy. So I think it's like a beautiful word, and it's sad, yet it's kind of poetic as well. It's not just about sadness. I'm not like, the Leonard Cohen of memoir writing. I think there is an optimism in it as well. But I think that being a human being is endlessly challenging, despite all the privilege that I have been born with, that you've been born with, that many people listening to this podcast will have been born with, living in. It's hard, and it doesn't really cease being hard. I found that very interesting as well. The kind of, Mum had this massive accident which formed me when I was 16, and for a while I thought, okay, that's the difficult bit of my life, that's the big challenge, that's the big trauma, that's the big tragedy, this is what happened to my mum. But then there have been multiple other big traumatic events and just the stuff of life. Being a mother itself is a very sad, melancholic experience, as every single mother will tell you, and it hits you like a ton of bricks. That kind of, like, the way that I love my children, the way that I feel about them, the way I feel trapped by motherhood, all of those things make me feel sad. Even the love that I have for them makes me feel really sad. So I've always felt this stuff really, really clearly, and it has been in writing. And I started out, like you, I did loads of journalism alongside you at the same time. We were writing the same kind of stuff about our lives in the Telegraph and the Times, and rather more Daily Mail than any of us would have liked. But it's a good place to speak as well, and it's a good place to kind of to have a voice about human emotions. And so then I started writing memoir, and then I started realizing that, my second book is called My Wild and Sleepless Nights, and it's about being a mother. And nothing really happens in that book. Like, my eldest son was then a teenager, he was expelled, and my fifth child was born. So I have 5 children. So I was dealing with like an adolescent and a baby at the same time, and then another 3 children in between. And I realized just the things that I was going through just to get through a day with a baby and a toddler and a preschool and an adolescent and a pre-adolescent was like fucking difficult and incredibly challenging. And I needed to express it. And I thought, and it was actually, that was in about 2016 when I was writing that. I'd just gone onto Instagram and women were talking more and connecting more around things like motherhood and grief, although grief came a bit later than that. It was really motherhood that people were talking about. But I also found on social media that people were expressing a version of motherhood that I didn't actually relate to at all, which was East London, pink walls and trainers and a kind of, it was that mummy blogger type of stage. And I didn't feel like that at all. I was having my fifth child. I felt a complete mess of chaos and love and confusion and pain. And I wanted to write about what that felt like. And so that's where that came from. And I think with each of my book, I do take myself back into the place. And in order to write with as much emotional clarity, because I think I do have a lot of emotional, I can explain what it feels like to stand in the kitchen boiling pasta. I can explain it in a way where you're cooking supper again, or I can explain what it feels like to stand in a room where you have stood with your sister who's dead and you're wanting her, or I can explain what it feels like to stand with a view in front of you of a landscape and feel like you are physically part of that landscape. I have an ability to explain that emotion, but in order to explain that emotion, I do have to re-feel it. So it's very demanding, but I'm so used to the demands of it. I mean, I enjoy it. And I also think that, I feel really strongly about, I'm really interested by the whole thing about trigger warnings and protect yourself from the pain. Actually, I think you take yourself into the pain. When you take yourself into the pain rather than shield yourself from it, that is when you can kind of have some agency around it. You can't control it. But you can have some kind of agency. I think that's the right word actually around it. And so I trigger myself. I will go and specifically make myself re-feel the feeling, and which is often a painful feeling, and re-feel that relationship. We're talking about relationships, kind of re-feel that connection or what it's about. And I had a big argument with somebody this morning, and I need to write about it, and I will go and take myself into the memory of what went wrong and what happened to my physical body and as I was standing in the kitchen having this argument, and try and understand what's happened there and how I am. I also think it's really important in memoir writing that you try and examine that you are unflinching in your criticism of yourself, of your understanding of yourself, that you have to, that's why Prince Harry's book is so weird, because he puts all the blame, not that I've read any, but like he seems to put all the blame onto other people. And I think it's so important to kind of engage with yourself, engage with your feelings, yes, but your failings as well.
Yes, I hear that. So you are very much part of it. You're not just sort of saying this stuff happens to me. It sort of happens through me. I do a lot of that in my counseling, which is how is it happening? What percentage are you responsible for the stuff that happens? It's a bit of self-responsibility. I know in memoirs you're saying something slightly different, but it's that feeling of it's not just because I was the spare.
Yeah.
It's more than that.
Yeah.
How do people around you feel about your writing? Like, for example, your children, when you wrote your book I know it was about you and about motherhood, but how do they feel about it?
Well, I think it's very interesting that, and I guess time will tell a bit, but at the moment, my eldest child is 23. My children, I think, feel relatively disengaged from it. I'm their mum. That's my relationship with them, as their mum. They know, of course, that I do this writing, and when I've written about them, as much as I do write about them, because I do think I'm writing about motherhood rather than them when I write about them, they will read stuff. Like my elder kids have read stuff. I would never, ever, ever write something that they didn't feel okay with or comfortable with. But then again, like, how much would they really tell? Maybe it is, I don't know, maybe it will create problems for them. I have to be clear-sighted about that. Maybe they will mind about it later on in their life. At the moment, if I'm there as their mum and I'm engaged as their mum, and that relationship between us is kind of working, then they don't really engage with my work very much. And I do worry, I suppose, later on in life as to how much they will mind about it. But I think, I mean, I hope that the way that I write, which is with a great deal of love and integrity, that's what they will feel through it. So I'm never ever judging them, and I'm always communicating my really, really deep love for them and my failings, my failings in it and my sort of shortcomings in what I've done or how I've behaved. But there's never a shortcoming of love at all. And and also, I did write about Jimmy being expelled. I wrote about a bit about that. But I also wrote about how that's a normal part of being a teenager. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write about it. So I was sitting in a cafe near to my home, and I heard these mums. It was when my son had been expelled, and then he'd moved on to a new school, and everything was kind of settling down. But it's difficult. Any parent of a teenager is, it's fucking difficult. And for both of you, for the child and I heard these mums going, "Oh, I'm just despairing. I don't recognize my son anymore. I just feel like giving up. I don't know who he is. I'm so angry with him, the way he's lying to me, or the way he's smoking weed or smoking cigarettes. He's always out. He ignores me. He shouts at me." And this kind of despair that these women were articulating and a sense of alienation from their child made me feel like as though I wanted to communicate this idea that what they were going through was a part of being the parent of a teenager and a part of the necessary process of growing up. And I wanted to kind of, kind of condone the behavior of the teenagers. They need to do that kind of stuff. Which teenager hasn't done that stuff? If they haven't, that's quite very unusual. And I think, I wanted to say, this is normal and this is part of it, and don't judge your child. And the feeling that which is very hard to do, but the feeling that I wanted to communicate as well is like the most important thing you can do is walk along beside them, even when all this stuff is going wrong, even when the police at your door, even when you've got to find a new school. Just communicate your love and your support for them, and that you are there. And that you believe in them, because other people will not be believing in them at the moment, and they will be feeling that. And so your presence and your sort of steadfastness, even in the face of being sworn at and shouted at and all the difficult stuff, is really, really, really important. And when I look at my elder children, I feel that that's like that love, that kind of that belief, that confidence in them, even through difficult stuff, has stood them really, really well, really, really well. And that was sort of what I wanted to, that was what I wanted to communicate in that writing. And I think that I also hope there's a part of me, definitely, which is that my mum ceased to be able to talk or communicate or even know who I was at the age of 16. From when I was 16, she was like 53. And I would love to have known her as an adult. And part of me, for me, if not for them, they might realize this later in life, it's kind of recording who I am as well for them. And whether they read it or not is kind of slightly irrelevant, I suppose. But there is a record. I have no record of who my mother really was in my adult relationship with her. And I would love to have had 4 memoirs written by her. But I'm not, I am not them. And maybe then they'll have a different relationship with my writing. I don't know. But I feel... I don't feel, when I look back at the writing, I don't think, there's anything in that I shouldn't have said that. Or I feel like I stand by it. I definitely stand by everything I've written, and I feel proud of it. And I don't feel like I've revealed anything about them or that they would feel compromised by in any way. And mostly, as long as I'm there and turning up to their stuff and cooking supper and doing all the things that mums do, then I don't think they really mind what my work, about my work particularly.
I mean, I think all that stuff about teenagers is brilliant. It's almost like parents forget they were teenagers. They say things like, "My kids lie to me." I'm like, okay, well, are we all scrupulously honest? I mean, adults lie, and kids lie They're real nice. And like you say, well, why do you think they're lying to you? Because they think you're going to be cross with them. I mean, I think however hard it is, and it is hard, I know it's hard, that steadfast sort of, I'm here, I believe in you, we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, which is hard at times. I think that's a really, really valid thing. Also, I think this bit about knowing your parents as people that aren't just your parents. You know, so sometimes my kids might say to me, you know, how come you made such a terrible, disastrous decision about something? And it's like I need to explain to them myself in an entirety as such. You know, I'm not just I'm also Lucy. And there's all sorts of facets to Lucy. And there's a history to Lucy that I kind of need to tell you about so that you can understand how we've ended up in this position. And it's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of understanding your parents as adults really only happens when you're an adult yourself as well, doesn't it? Like, I feel like I'm understanding more and more about my dad, and understanding more and more about his life and his motivations, and you know, feeling more and more connection to him. And I'm 49 and he's in his 70s, so it's a long-term reveal, isn't it, of who we really are. And I think that it's important, and it makes you feel so much more. I hate the word compassion because it was really hijacked by Harry. I don't know why I'm talking about Prince Harry so much, but they're constantly talking about compassion.
I think a lot of our therapy weekends are going back to Prince Harry.
But, you know, it does make you feel like more compassion. I don't want to say forgiveness. I have nothing to forgive my dad for in any way whatsoever. I totally understand him as a human being, but it makes me feel more love and connection to him, knowing him as an adult and understanding. But it takes a long. I mean, I don't think you really start looking at your parents as kind of other adults until you're in your 30s, really. Well, I know that I didn't really. I was still, you know, in your 20s, you're still very young, aren't you? You're still dealing with so much very young stuff. And it's kind of once you get into the, you know, I think 30 is I think 30 should be the new 21, really. It's like such a big formative moment, isn't it? When you really become an adult, I think, at 30. For me. Anyway, I know that that's when my life changed, and I took a kind of, even though I'd had 2 kids in my 20s and got married and got divorced, I think I sort of took a level of responsibility or something, or self kind of became myself in my 30s, at 30.
And of course, if you have a parent, like my father died when I think I was like 31 or 32. Again, you know, like with your mother, you don't get that opportunity to get to know them. And in a way, you know, I sort of started building up a fantasy. It's a sort of interesting dynamic. I mean, you know, I was thinking about relationships you have with the dead, you know, with people that are no longer present, because like you, my sister died, but she still feels amazingly present to me. So carry on these relationships, even though someone is not physically alive.
Not physically there, yeah, but it's very interesting, grief, because that kind of that ongoing relationship, I don't know about for you, and I'd be really interested to talk about this, but I feel that grief and the death of my sister has rearranged my relationship with so many people in a negative way, honestly. Like, it's had such a devastating effect on so many relationships, and people kind of talk about this and imply this and things, but I don't think we sort of talk about it enough or really understand it enough, because there's a certain degree of shame, I think, around it, and the kind of the way you change as a person through grief, and the world around you changes, and other people's reactions to the way that you grieve it can be really can alter, you know, the nature of your relationships with one another. And I didn't expect that. You know, I've lost friends through grief, which I just did not expect. And it's probably like, it's not just, because my sister died. It's like a multiple different factors coming together. But and maybe it's also, do you think that in each decade, like our relationships kind of, you look back at, your friends or the people that you were close to, family members in each decade, it's maybe not as neat as each decade, but there's a change, isn't there? There's a big change between who you spend time
Yeah.
with.
Yes, I mean, I think if I was to line up the people that came to my 20th, 30th, 40th, 50th birthday parties, who would be there? Who would be the people I was hanging out with at the time? So there's a couple of people I've known for a very, very long time, and they were, but they changed. There was, the Schoolgate people. Now I'm not a Schoolgate mum. Hallelujah! Thank goodness for that. That changes because my kids aren't really at school anymore. So I mean, things you're still at the Schoolgate stage, although I don't know if Americans do that at school. I bet they do.
Yeah, no, I am. I've got years and years. I mean, my youngest child is only 7. So I have like.
Oh, you've got years.
Don't say it, Lucy. I do.
I'm 10 years older than you, but I tell you, the minute I could walk away from the school gate, I was like, yes! The idea of never having to do World Book Day again, or having to make any more rubbish cakes, or having to, I'm delighted.
Yeah, no, that's definitely demanding. But yeah, I think it's interesting, that kind of the rearrangement of grief, and it's shocking actually. I've been really shocked by it, and I feel really sad about it. But maybe it's a necessary kind of. I have a very strong image in my head. Like, I definitely see emotions in my head, and I feel that after the death of someone. And I was talking to Liz Gilbert, who's a friend of mine, about this actually in this house. She came and had lunch. We were talking about, I said, like, my life has just rearranged itself in ways. And moving to Washington has nothing to do with that at all. Like, that's just a change of geographical location. But there's a kind of emotional rearrangement, which is somebody is like, so when somebody dies, I'm not saying they are the glass of water. It's like I see a kind of coloured glass of water, and it's as though that spills over. But then that water finds new places amongst the rocks, that surrounding it. And those places, the kind of the beauty of grief and the kind of beauty of a change in your age, I suppose, is being able to find those new places that the water, the new places between the rocks that you didn't know was there. But it's sad because you lose things. And there's also a sense that you gain things that with the death of somebody, I have gained things that I couldn't have anticipated, and I wouldn't really have wanted those things, and yet I did gain them. I can't bring my sister alive again. Nothing can bring my sister alive again. I am alive at the moment. I probably won't be alive for very much. Our lives are brief, aren't they? So live your life. Live your life with the stuff that is going on for you, and that's kind of like, it's sort of like learning to ride a bike or something. It's like really nerve-wracking, and you fall off and then suddenly you're away. And I feel as though that's happened to me. And but it's brought change that I couldn't have anticipated, and change at the end of some relationships that I wouldn't have thought would have ended at all. And that's been very hard. But in those ending, there has also been new beginnings and new growth and new evolution. So it's surprising that the effect it has on relationships, I found really surprising.
Was it that, and I'm not asking you obviously to go into to personal details, but was it that people didn't understand your grief? I mean, I found a lot of people didn't know what to say to me. And I think it's strange when it's your sister and they've got children. It's like, who's got the right to which bit of grief? It gets really complicated because my mother's still alive. And so there was a lot around her grief of losing her daughter. And it gets very complicated and knotty, I found.
Yeah, I think so. And also because I wrote a book about grief, my grief for my sister. And I think that and I very, very consciously didn't bring anybody else into that book. It's barely even got my sister in it. It's definitely hasn't got her friends. It hasn't got her children. It hasn't got the people close to her. And actually, I did that incredible. It hasn't even got her name until the very end of it, because I didn't want it to be a book about the person that she was. And she's sort of quite well known in certain parts of England. She's very well known, actually. And I didn't want it to be about, and she has this, she had this circus. I didn't want it to be about like, oh, who she was, Nell Gifford and her circus, and the memoir of the loss of this incredible creative. I wanted it to be a book about grief, and I refer to her as my sister throughout, so that anybody picking up that book would be able to not be reading it with an image of her in their mind, but an image, if they were reading it, would relate to them, whether it was they might be thinking my father or my mother or my friend or my brother, it would be that the sense of grief is kind of universal in that book. And I didn't, so I wrote a book about grief, and I think that upset some people. I don't know why. I mean, I know it did, and they kind of haven't revealed to me why. And if they don't want to reveal to me, then I'm not going to push them on it. But like, I know that has, but me kind of voicing my grief. And why shouldn't I voice my grief? I'd also feel like I know alienated me from some people, but I found that the people that want to talk and are able to talk are the people that I want to talk to, and I am able to talk to. And those that don't want to talk to me anymore because of it, maybe that's just what had to happen in our relationship, and the connections that I feel that are increasingly strong with people who do want to connect, because there's a lot of I find it extraordinary that we alienate those who've lost somebody that they love, and I guess people might have used, well, you wrote a book about it, as a kind of reason for that. I don't know, but I know that I have to write what I have to write. I have to, if somebody wants to kind of not talk to me anymore because I've written a book about something that I went through, then that's that's okay. That I'm not going to not do it. That's my need to express, and my ability, I know, to connect with people through what I express is kind of overrides everything for me. And I think that's part of, I'm a writer, I am an artist, and I'm a writer, and it's not just kind of finding a subject to write about. I had to express that, and I stand by it.
Yeah, I think that's difficult. I don't think that's difficult. I think that's absolutely valid, because when I was dating someone once, he was like, "Oh, I've read about you and I love all your journalism. Oh, but by the way, you can't write about me." And I was like, "Well, hang on a minute. If you don't want me to write about you, don't go out with a writer." That's what writers do.
Yeah, I know. And if you have to, there is that expression, isn't there, about like there's a shard of glass in the heart of every writer. And I think that's true. We're constantly observing and constantly recording in some way and constantly filtering. And I'm constantly thinking about work, and I'm not work. I'm constantly thinking about what I'm experiencing and how to express that, and whether this thing that I'm experiencing now is part of this next project that I want to concentrate on. And but I'm not experiencing things in a cynical way as a result of that at all. And there are things that I wouldn't write about. There's this stuff that's happened around grief that I wouldn't write about, because I'm not kind of engaged and interested by it enough to write about it. Like, you have to in order to write, you have to write. If you want to write a book, you have to really, really want to immerse yourself in that topic. And it can't just be something that might be, for me, it can't just be something that, oh, that might be commercial, or it has to be something I'm fascinated by and into in every kind of way. So there are relationships that I don't write about because I'm not engaged with them in the same ways. But the stuff that really, really, really engages me, I do have to write about. And I think it is difficult for the people around us. I think it can be difficult for my husband, who I'm married to, But then his work is difficult for me, you know. He goes away months at a time. I don't really like that, but I wouldn't stop him from doing it. And
Yes.
and that's and I'm not like saying, well, you do that, so I'm going to get my own back and write about you. That is not the case at all. But like, it's not just in the writing that our actions affect and, you know, affect our relationships. It's not just his work affects my life in a massive way, and it's a two-way thing, I suppose. But yeah, it's. I also think as a writer, like I was talking to Sophie Hayward about this, I think that there's. I also think that I like live my life with a kind of emotional connection and ferocity and kind of power, emotional power, yeah, which is it's good for my children to be around. Like they're lucky to have it. I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, but like they're lucky because I connect deeply with them and with their lives and with what's going on. And part of that is probably being a writer that enables me to do that. So that, yeah, it's maybe a bit annoying being written about sometimes, you know, sometimes they get recognized occasionally. And it maybe that's through Instagram really more than anything, but a bit annoying, but there's a lot of good stuff that comes with it. You know, there's a lot of real kind of emotional depth that comes from being the child of a writer or in a relationship with someone who's a writer.
So yes, I mean, which your readers obviously. So I was thinking about grief. When my father died, I had a call from Veronica Wadley, who at that point I think she was editing the Standard or the Mail. And because I was completely mad, I thought she somehow by osmosis knew that my father had died and had called up to say she was so sorry. So I was like, oh, Veronica, it's so kind of you to call. He'd literally been dead about an hour. And she was like, I mean, you know, you just go into this completely mad world. I mean, I remember walking out of the door and feeling that I needed a sign around me that said, you know, tread carefully. So I'm in grief. I'm in an altered state. You know, I like this idea. New mums, you know, that we get new fathers, we get some kind of ribbon or something we can wear that's alerting people. You know, I'm not, you know, tread a little carefully, be a little kind, be a little bit more considerate, or give me a little bit more, you know, leeway about my emotions and my feelings. Anyway, getting to this book, The Giant on the Skyline, you've moved obviously away from this beautiful place, the Uffington White Horse. It's very lyrical. It's very beautiful about the countryside, about our feelings. You're now in Washington. So tell us a little bit about how that feels to you. You've left behind this rambling English home with an Arga. You know, I have a real picture of it in my, the reader will have such a wonderful picture of it. I think it's so beautifully vivid.
Yeah, I really wanted to I mean, there's lots of things I wanted to do in that book, but one of them was to really create a sense of this landscape and the house and the people within the landscape and my relationships with the people within the landscape, the community which I live in. Because the book it's about lots of different things, but that kind of community, and there's tons of different voices in it. And that was very, very consciously and carefully done. But moving here has been it's been really interesting and really, really difficult. And I'm aware that when I say this, you know, there's like scenes of horrific loss of home all over the world at the moment. And actually that almost stopped me being able to write the book. So I often thought, well, what right do you have to write about loss of home when there is very, very real, you know, loss of home for millions of people at the moment? But that would, you know, I'm not writing about war or the refugee experience or, you know, migration through climate change. That's there are those different, but I am aware of my privilege. Well, I moved from Oxfordshire to Washington DC, you know, but that brought with it a lot of change and change in my relationships and a lot of loss of my everyday life, the community of my everyday life. And the idea of moving to America is very exciting, and America is a very exciting place, and it's a fantastic place for holidays. But at the end of the holiday, you don't get to go home. You have to then, you know, get your children to school and tax the car and work out your own social security and taxation and all that kind of stuff, i.e. normal fucking boring life and difficult life. And doing that now in a city which I don't know, which I didn't really have any connection to, well, I didn't have any connection to, or has been difficult in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated, despite the fact I'd written a whole book about leaving and anticipating it. But the kind of loss of community is really the biggest thing, actually, and loss of the day-to-day friendships. My friendships with people that I saw every day when I'm at home. And I live in a very small village, and I love rural life. I've lived in the countryside, apart from Oxford, which is not a big city. I've lived in the countryside my whole life. I feel deeply at home there. But those incidental friendships with people on the road, at the village shop, who you buy your eggs from, at the garage, getting your petrol, the place you go and get at Greg's, those really, really matter. Those are my life. And when you take yourself away from those, you lose that connection to real people, and re-finding it in a new place is difficult and extremely destabilizing, as you would expect it to be. It's very to be completely honest with you, when I first got here, after the first month, when I just felt, whoa, like I had vertigo, then I had to get into normal life. And I did actually feel, I know what grief feels like, I know what depression feels like very, very well. And I did feel about 3 months of something which I can only say was like very similar to postnatal depression. When I say to people, like, moving to a new city is like having a baby, the ones who've done it understand what I'm talking about, but you have a complete loss of identity. You have no idea how you're going to get from one side of the day to the other, like navigating new systems. You're alone. You've kind of lost all your friends in some way or another. You're a completely different person, and yet a new person. You're exhausted because it's really tiring trying to work out how to make the supermarket, the cash point, the garage all work for you. It's really, really difficult. And it also made me realize that loads of stuff that you'd kind of do on autopilot, and you can like just go to the supermarket. I could literally go to Aldi in Farringdon in Oxfordshire, buy the ingredients for the lasagna and drive home and cook it with my eyes shut. Like, I literally could do that. Whereas suddenly you're in a new place, and even the food doesn't behave in the same way. The mince does not behave in the same way when you cook it. A chicken doesn't roast in the same way. And those might seem like really small things, but they made me feel really unconfident about myself and who I am. And I went from being like this woman who was writing a book. I launched a podcast. I packed up a house. I moved, rearranged the lives of 5 children, 2 staying in England, 3 coming over here. Like, I really had my shit together. And then I moved here, and suddenly I don't know how to like drive in the right, how much of the carriageway to take up when I'm driving, or what kind of food to buy. And that was a really, really strange feeling. But also, strange isn't necessarily bad. It wasn't a particularly pleasant feeling, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. And I do think that I've kind of grown and learned more things about myself. And that's all the good, all the learning we do comes through the hard stuff, really, doesn't it? It doesn't come through the you don't learn loads about your stuff during a really positive period of your life. You just thank your lucky stars that you're in a positive period.
I moved to Manhattan when Raymond was about 2. He's now 27. It was an extraordinary, strange experience. I lasted 4 months and bailed out. I couldn't find cheese. I couldn't, I just couldn't. I couldn't. It was impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't find really. I went to some cheese shop in Greenwich Village and said, "Could I have your, vintage cheddar?" And it tasted like, it was mild. I couldn't get my head around it, and it all came to a head one day when I was trying to pay for something in the diner. And the guy was saying, it's another dime. And I couldn't remember what a dime was. And the man behind me really lost his shit with me and was like, "Come on, lady." And I was like, you know what?
This is it. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be hassled. I don't live like this. I don't know what a dime is. I can't seem to go to the subway. I've got a kid. No one else in Manhattan seems to have any children at all. I'm going home.
Yeah.
I'm just going home. I'm going home to and I'm just going home.
It's really interesting because when I say this to friends who are in England who've never done this, people really, really look at me really, really blankly and just don't get it. And I understand that because it seems like this incredible opportunity. But I've made some really close friendships with. There's one woman in particular who's living outside New York. We've never met. We talk pretty much every day. She moved here at exactly the same time as me in very similar circumstances, and we can talk about it, because when I talk to my friends at home, like, it's really, and also you feel as though you're being ungrateful, but it is really, really, really complicated. So hearing your story, actually, I find that kind of, it's good. It's quite nice to hear that, and knowing that we've made it through a year, and the kids have done like a year of school, and we've made some friends, and I love and the weekends off. I love holidays in America, but I think daily life is really quite difficult. And also it's like a communication and the way that women relate to each other. There's lots of things which are really, really, really different. And when you got back to England, did you feel what did you feel like when you got back to England, having gone there and then?
Delighted, because it freed me up to go, actually, I like living in the countryside. I like chestnuts roasting by a fire. I like, going minnowing with a minnowing jar. I'm basically English. But actually, I now live part-time in Greece when I can, and I feel completely differently about that. I feel like I must have been Greek in another life. I feel completely at home in Greece. But it's not that dissimilar.
But do you think that's because you're not having to do family life? Well, I mean, I'm sure your children are visiting,
but I don't have to do any of that. But I don't know. I think there's something about emotional connections with countries. But we probably need to wrap up. But I think there's something about America. I trained with Americans. It's great. It's a very alien place for me to be. Places like Greece. Greece is it's just chilled.
Yeah.
It's just a very laid-back place. It's warm. It's chill. People are helpful. No one minds stuff. It's an easy place to be if you don't need to get things done.
Yeah.
Now, where can we find you? Where can everyone find you? Give us your Insta. Where would you like people to connect with you?
I really like Instagram, like clover.stroud. I love being there. And then I recently went onto Substack. So I write a big essay every week about all of, my Substack is called On the Way Life Feels. And that's what I do as a writer, is to write about the way life feels. That's what I'm really interested by. So I write a different piece every week about like what home is, or I wrote recently about like taking screens away from my kids and how that has affected them, or creativity and color, just like a different kind of topic every week. I really enjoy that. It's a longer form place to write, but those are the two main places. And also in my books, I love to share my books with people. And if people read and then they contact me via Instagram or come to an event, or, I teach memoir as well, which I really, really enjoy. I do it in America and England, and that's all on my website, which is cloverstroud.com. So everything is kind of there, I suppose. But read the book and then send me a message and let me know what you think about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the book is The Giant on the Skyline, and Clover obviously has other books she's written, all of which you will be able to find bookshops, Amazon, wherever else. Connect with her. Thank you so much for coming on and being so open and sharing everything with us.
Thank you very much, Lucy. It's been really lovely. I've really, really enjoyed it.